Hello, everyone, and welcome to the PMO Virtual Summit. We have an exciting session for you guys today. We have a power couple, Alan Waite and Dr. CJ Walker Waite. We're going to be talking about enterprise agility. Is it leadership science or leadership magic? Enterprise agility, huh? Is that a topic for PMOs? Yes. And that's what Alan and CJ are going to be talking to us all about. But before I hand it over to them, I'd love to go ahead and tell you a bit about them. Alan Waite is CEO of the Praxis Corporation and Executive Director of the Phoenix Rising Praxis Foundation, a nonprofit organization. He is also an adjunct professor of project management at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee School of Continuing Education, corporate program, and an executive coach. Over a span of 30 years, Alan has served as a business executive, legislative analyst for 2 statewide elected officials, trainer, inspirational speaker, author, and courtroom trial consultant. In addition, he was board chairman and senior VP for NVS Technologies, a bioremedial corporation, and senior VP of Palace Productions, a California-based music production company. Now, a quick bio on Dr. CJ Walker Waite. She is the executive vice president of the Praxis Corporation and a professor of the practice at Northeastern University. She has over a quarter century of strategic organizational transformation and program and project management experience, spanning nearly a dozen nations and 13 different industries across North America and Europe, with multi-billion-dollar global clients like Saab, Nortel, Discovery, Bechtel, ABC Disney, and MTV, just to name a few. Dr. CJ Walker Waite is serving as a director on the PMI GAC, which is the Global Accreditation Council, and previously served as a director on its international board of directors. Alan and CJ, it's a pleasure having you both here today. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Hussein. Thank you for inviting us, and it's a pleasure to be with all of you today. We want to welcome you to our session on enterprise agility. We have subtitled it, Is it Leadership Science or Leadership Magic? We'll talk about the question of magic in just a little bit, but for the moment, let's take a look at what the agenda is for this presentation. Enterprise agility is something that applies not just to project management, but it applies throughout life. Everything we do, of course, is an enterprise, whether it's in our personal lives, professional lives, or actually just even cleaning the house. That's an enterprise. So it requires a certain level of agility, but in today's age, an age that has been described by most professionals and authors as a digital age, third wave, enterprise agility is even more critical. Being able to react, being able to innovate, being able to connect, and having a high level of integrity is critical to surviving in the fast-paced digital age in which we are engaged. So what we want to do is take a look at that challenge. We'll be defining that problem, if you will, and providing some solutions to how you should run a PMO as an agile leader, how you should be engaged, not just with the project, the technology, the strategy, the goals, not just with cost, scope, not just with resources, but actually engaged with people. That's what we call Prax-ical Magic. Prax-ical coming from the name of our company, Praxis. Praxis is the tension between being somebody in action according to who you say you are going to be. It's that area where you find that the analysis of the problem meets your ability to solve it. And so that tension Prax-ical creates what we call a conundrum in leadership. How do we actually rise to the occasion when business is so fast-paced and moving so quickly that the old ways of leading just don't work anymore? We say it's magic, and we'll tell you why in just a minute. So we're going to talk about the concept of Prax-ical Magic. We're going to talk about the changing business landscape that demands enterprise agility, what enables it, what creates it, and then specifically we will address how a PMO is affected by enterprise agility and how a PMO actually affects enterprise agility. Finally, we're going to talk about just the generic concept of leadership agility and how it plays out in the professional world in the digital age today. Again, our magical solution, Prax-ical Magic, well, it has actually a more practical term, if you will. We at Praxis call it transformational project leadership. That's because in order to be a leader in a project environment today, you have to be constantly transforming, not just how you think, but how you react, and maybe even what services and products you deliver. Let's move on. So what is enterprise agility? Loosely defined, it's becoming adept, becoming skilled at creating and then maintaining sustainable excellence when in a turbulent business environment. Now, why is that important? Because that is the environment in which we live and operate today. The digital age has taken what historically has been a fairly predictive, progressive business world and punched it into hyperspeed. And so, as Dr. CJ will talk about a little bit later, innovation is constantly happening, and what is unique and groundbreaking one day becomes standard practice, sometimes within just a few months. So being able to react, being able to actually reflect and project enterprise agility is a key. What does this mean specifically in terms of how, when you're operating a PMO, you should be thinking? The first thing that the digital age has done, again, is it has taken what had been historically fairly slow level of change within organizations in terms of the industry itself that you'd be involved in, and it's accelerated it. That means that at one time, we used to be able to be fairly predictive in terms of where our industry was going. When innovation occurred, innovation generally was, there were significant time frames between this innovation and the next innovation. So you didn't have to be constantly updating yourself, at least not on a daily or weekly basis, to see what's happening within the industry where you work. That's changed. Now, change happens so rapidly. Sometimes it can even be within a week something has happened you have to be aware of so that your organization can adapt and improvise and overcome. So industry awareness is really critical, not just in terms of having industry awareness, but having it on a frequent basis, much more frequent basis. But that then raises the question, what do you do with that? Then the next step is self-awareness. Again, in the old days, and by old days we're talking just over a decade and a half ago, you were confident of your abilities, your skills, your gifts, you were confident of your team, you understood the needs of your clients and your stakeholders. That is so rapidly changing in the digital age that that level of self-awareness has to be constantly changing with your understanding of industry. And then what that creates is an awareness that there is probably going to be an ongoing gap, that you are generally going to be playing catch up. Now, hopefully that catch up is going to be a small amount of time, whereas you might have been able to catch up to the industry within 1 or 2 years and still be competitive and sustainable in the old days. That isn't happening today. And so the gap awareness means knowing what your skills, your talents, your gifts, what you offer, what that combination is, and then how it needs to change and adapt instantly. For example, clients' expectations can change overnight. Today, people are expecting what's called a freemium. When you go out online and you do commerce, they expect to be given something for nothing, something of value, and then they make the decision as to whether or not they want to do business with you. And there's a whole list of other expectations in the digital world that didn't happen just 5 and 10 years ago. And so in order to achieve success, in order to maximize profits, in order to achieve the end result, in order to get that project implemented, you are going to have to bridge that gap. And believe us, there are plenty of sharks out there that are going to grab that opportunity right out of your hands if you are not constantly reevaluating your industry, your skills, and trying to meet that gap. Now, how do you meet that gap? What are the tools and what's the toolkit? We call it magic. And again, we'll explain that in just a few moments. But what it really is a methodology of thinking and acting and being that we call transformational project leadership, or TPL. What does that give you if you engage in TPL? And we can tell you from experience of the last 6 years of going out to market and explaining this and training people in the area of TPL. You will increase repeat business if you are offering a service or if you're offering a product. You will increase greater market share. You'll be more competitive. You will be sustainable in a digital age, and that's really what we want to be. And of course, you're going to make more money and be happier. But from a PMO perspective, what you will be is more successful, more effective. And that, of course, will have a direct effect on what you're trying to accomplish in your own personal life. So what is Prax-ical Magic? There are 3 things, 3 what we call eternal truths that have evolved and now are important in sustaining business or even growing it in the third wave of the digital age. Third wave as defined by former AOL CEO and chairman Steve Case in his book called Third Wave, by the way. The first is, and we've touched on this already, innovation. You have to be relentlessly innovative. Otherwise, you're not going to survive. Secondly, connection. Again, we'll talk about that in more detail in a few minutes. But the degree to which you are connected to your teams, your people, your stakeholders is enhanced to the nth degree as we move towards fast lightning pace of business, academia, government, and even our personal lives. So innovation, connection, and finally, and this is a real interesting eternal truth, or what we call the third pillar of TPL, integrity. More than ever, when we are not dealing with each other on a face-to-face basis, when establishing relationships is much different than it used to be, when there are so many more options available and so many more products and services that you can get at your fingertip, integrity becomes critical. That's how you get your repeat business. It's the idea that, again, in praxis, who you say you are and how you behave, how you perform, have to be as closely intermingled as possible. Otherwise, you're not going to survive. Let's move ahead. So let's take a look at how another organization describes this phenomenon.
Holographic boss sent his day in the office. Businesses have been obsessed with increasing efficiency and getting the most out of their employees. And this goes all the way to how they set up their office space. Now, in the early 20th century, your typical office looked like a giant open factory floor with a manager up above looming over the employees. And in the 1980s, we saw the birth of the beautiful cubicle farm, which could be kind of a bummer to work in, but hey, it gave us Dilbert and that fax machine seen in Office Space, so they're not all bad, right? Meanwhile, as technology has evolved, the office has evolved as well. Mobile technology and tablets have given rise to open office environments where you might not even sit at the same desk every day. At one of these offices, you would come in to work and a computer would tell you which desks are available. And you pick which one you want based upon what you're working on and who you need to see. You just have to remember to take that photo of you and your dog with you when you're done for the day. And of course, with Wi-Fi becoming more available, the office now is really wherever you are. See, we've had video conferencing for years, but now companies are experimenting with telepresence robots, which allow the user to control the point of view and look at who or whatever they want based upon a robotic camera eye. They can even move around and get a feel for the office. Maybe they'll go on down to the water cooler for some juicy gossip. So, what might a typical office day look like in, say, 2030? Not so typical. You might start your day with a 3D holographic video conference with your CEO, then log into your department meeting via your avatar, which can mimic your actual movements and facial expressions. Now, as you work, software tracks which apps you use for how long, which emails you tend to put off, and the tone of your response in the emails you send. Your body monitoring device encourages you to get up if you've been sitting around for too long, doing things like playing the video games developed by your company to encourage and reward innovative thinking. Moving around gets your heart rate up, it might get some alpha waves going to really encourage creativity. And speaking about alpha waves and creativity, companies like 3M and Google are doing that by setting aside time, sometimes between 15 and 20% of an employee's work week, to work on pet projects. Other companies inspire employees to take naps or long walks or even just work from home all the time. Eventually, we'll probably move into an environment where we just have virtual offices and robot assistants will answer all of our emails for us. But will such work be rewarding? Well, think about it. Work has evolved over time. Toiling in the field has given way in large part to toiling over a 37-message-long email chain or trying to figure out how to keep people from nodding off during your PowerPoint presentation on assessing possible synergies to critical success factors across multiple verticals. It's still toiling. One thing that will not change, though, is that we still need people to work together to solve problems collaboratively, whether it's in a video conference or a challenging video game level. And one other thing that might not change are work hierarchies. So a little word of advice. Watch what you say about the boss when you're at the water cooler, even if it's a virtual water cooler. And hey, I've got a question for you. What is your vision of the office of the future? We want to know. Let us know in the comments. Make sure you like this video and subscribe to this channel. We've got some amazing videos about the future coming up really soon.
Excellent. So that tells you a vision for the future. But in addition to that, you want to look at how is that directly impacted in the industry that we're in, which is in project management. Well, PMI maintains that all strategic change happens through projects and programs. Although PMI has long argued for the strategic value of management and its role in implementing strategy, the current positioning was defined in 2010. In about 2013-14, we came up with strategic initiative management. They defined a linkage between strategy formulation and strategy execution through the program management discipline. Program management integrates strategy, people, process, technology, structure, and measurement on cross-functional initiatives. This can be defined and led by the PMO, which often has a strategic linkage. What has happened today now in the 2016 is that PMI has offset that into a launch of Brightline to promote the strategic initiative management. This is a coalition dedicated to helping organizations bridge the gap between strategy development and implementation. The coalition consists of PMI, Boston Consulting Group, Agile Alliance, and Thinkers 50. And it allows PMI to rebrand itself and takes the discussion up a level to make program, project, and portfolio management actually at the strategic level. Where's another area that we're seeing change? Well, what's this third wave thing that Alan has mentioned and is in, there's a book and we align with in our presentation for enterprise agility. Let's look at the Industrial Revolution eras to define how this fits into that. If you recall, the first industrial revolution was in the 18th to 19th centuries. It was in Europe and America, and it included agrarian, rural societies, which became industrial and urban, and the iron and textile industries were developed. The second industrial revolution began in 1870 and went to about 1914. What we saw in this period was a growth for pre-existing industries and expansion of new ones such as steel, oil, and electricity, and they used electric power. In the 1980s, we started the third industrial revolution. This was the advancement of technology from analog electronic and mechanical devices to the digital technology available today. It is during this time frame that we began to see the waves of the digital age as defined by Steve Case. The first wave of the digital age was 1985 to 1999. What we saw here was the laying of the foundation of the online world. The companies that were the architects of this phase included AOL, Cisco, Sun, IBM. In the second wave, approximately 2000 to 2015, this was the period of the app economy, mobile revolution, and companies that are best represented through Amazon, Facebook, Twitter, and Google, among others. And we are now moving into the third wave of the digital age. And what's interesting is as we move into the third wave of the digital age, we are also entering the fourth industrial revolution. Starting in 2016, it's a fusion of technologies that is blurring the lines between the physical, digital, and biological spheres. So what distinguishes the first three phases and the previous industrial revolutions to the third wave and the fourth industrial revolution? Well, first of all, previously we've always focused on people, products, and platforms. That's been our 3 Ps, and how we manipulate and create and use these elements to get market share and to advance our economy and advance our businesses. However, in this third wave of the digital age, we need to go beyond technology and its enablement. We need to look at partnerships, policies, and perseverance. And you will find that PMOs will be highly relevant in defining, managing, and driving partnerships, policies, and perseverance of the organization so that they can be sustainable. For example, let's look at partnerships. If you really want to revolutionize, say, healthcare, while there are some things you can do with apps, there is more that you can do when you work with doctors and partners within the hospitals. Here's an example. The MRI machine. Historically, we've had a real challenge with trying to have children who needed an MRI for like brain cancer to lie still. It's terrifying. This big machine, and it makes this weird noise, and you're in trouble if you move, but if you move, they can't get a good image, right? So the individuals who are involved in this third wave partnership said, how do we make this appealing or at least useful to children? Well, what's a game that children love to play? Hide and seek. So what they said is, how do we incorporate this concept of hide and seek into our MRI? Initially, what do the two have in common? Absolutely nothing, right? But what if the MRI looked like a tropical island, or it was a spaceship, or a pirate ship? Now you could tell the child, here's the deal. Captain Hook is on his way, and we need to hide you in the cargo bay. And you need to be very quiet and very still. And then, if he passes us, you get to go to the treasure chest and get a prize. When the child walked into that MRI room, the whole thing was decked out into a pirate ship. They couldn't even tell there was an MRI machine. They just saw a cargo bay. And they went into it, and they were playing hide and seek. The images were taken beautifully, and not only did they get what they needed to help the child with that MRI, they wanted to come back and do it again. That is a great example of partnership and what we're looking for now in the enablement of technology in the digital age. Another one is policy. I'm not sure that if you've seen, as an example, these driverless cars. Well, there are huge policy issues associated with that. First being is, how does insurance insure a driverless car? Who's at fault? The car? Well, you're not going to go back to the auto manufacturer. But if somebody's not paying attention, I mean, we have enough issues as it is with people who are driving the cars. This is just an example. In the auto industry, you also have it in medical, education, and everything else. And then when we look at perseverance, they thought that AOL was an overnight sensation, but in fact, it was an entity that was 10 years in the making. And that's what we're going to have to see when we are looking at this constantly changing environment that we're going forward with in this fourth industrial revolution and the third wave of the digital age. You have to have perseverance to be sustainable, because what you develop today may or may not be relevant tomorrow. And why is that? Well, we're going to look at something called VUCA. VUCA is a concept that originated with students at the U.S. Army War College to describe the volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity of the world after the Cold War. And you use VUCA to drive towards strategic foresight, to position yourself for the future. An example was assume that you're out there on a sailboat, right? And you're used to having the wind at your sails, and it moves you forward. Well, what happens when the wind stops? You're at the mercy of the elements, right? What strategic foresight and the VUCA era tells you is that, and what ships have done in the Navy, is they'll actually send a boat out with a long rope to the major boat, right? And they'll drop anchor then where they want it to go, and then the boat people pull themselves towards that point. That's strategic foresight, identifying where you want to be in the future and then pulling the organization toward that. A perfect alignment for the PMO. So what our brain loves to categorize, and this is the challenge we have in VUCA. And when we categorize, we learn from the past to secure our future. And this has worked well for thousands of years. Without this ability to predict the future based on the past, to identify risks, we would have disappeared as a species. This complex internal evolutionary system has done an incredible job of protecting us and allowing us to prosper for millennia. But right now, it is beginning to fail and limit us. Now, why is that? The VUCA environment means that we must focus on what is possible, because anything can happen, rather than what is likely to occur, which is determined by what happened before. Trend analysis will have no value in our VUCA realm. Now, the new generation PMO can start instilling different habits within the organization to position the organization to be a change-ready organization and positioned for sustainability, strategic foresight, and the changes in the future. There are 4 things that you can start doing. One is asking different types of questions. Another is to take on multiple perspectives, develop a systemic vision, and look at the whole picture and take a step back to what is possible. Now we're going to look at what happens that's unpredictable in the world. And when we look at unpredictability and complexity, we'll see that they're closely aligned in this whole idea of ambiguity. An example of positive complexity in the external environment is a product going viral and becoming an internet sensation overnight, right? But an example of negative complexity is how the hopelessness of a Tunisian fruit vendor led to Brexit. We use this as an example. On December 17, 2010, Mohamed Bouazi, a young fruit vendor in Tunisia, was cited for not having a permit to sell produce. The police attempted to extort the equivalent of $7 from him, which is more than he could have hoped to make in a single day. In despair, and with no other way to protest, he doused himself with gasoline in front of the municipality building and struck a match, not only igniting himself, but igniting the frustration of Arab youth around the world. Of course, people around him took pictures and videos of this instance, and the news rapidly went viral on social media, this included huge demonstrations. 28 days after this self-imposed immolation, the Tunisian president fled to Saudi Arabia, stepping down after 23 years in power, and so began the Arab Spring. When the Syrian people rose up against Bashar al-Assad, instead of stepping down like many of his counterparts in the other Arab countries, he led his country into a civil war, producing millions of refugees. The growing public discontent about these refugees compounded by other complicated factors, such as financial disparity among the nations in the European Union. And this resulted on burdens that were bigger and healthier countries taking on more, such as the United Kingdom, which led to a Brexit referendum. On June 24, 2016, more than $2 trillion of wealth vanished in equity markets around the world, in the highest one-day sell-off in history. Never could the British voting public, or perhaps anyone in the world, have imagined that such an outcome began when a fruit vendor set himself on fire in Tunisia 6 years earlier. How can these two events at all be related? It's the chain of events because of our VUCA world, the complexity and ambiguity. Think about it. If fewer people had cell phones, as was the case just a decade ago, they wouldn't have been able to capture Boazi's self-immolation. If fewer people were connected on social media, the news wouldn't have gone viral. If fewer people had access to TV, radio, and internet, they wouldn't have been inspired to revolt against their own countries. Italy or Greece, they wouldn't have been able to flee to England or Germany if they hadn't had access to transportation, and the more affluent countries of the European Union. The increased interdependence among all the variables involved resulted in Brexit. Unpredictability is itself a hallmark characteristic of complexity. What made for successful leaders in the industrial era simply won't work in the rampant unpredictability of the VUCA era. The good news is that negative complexity can, and in fact, can be harnessed to create positive complexity because the underlying principles that govern both are the same. The sad news is that very few organizations are prepared to operate in this higher level of complexity. But this opens the door for the next generation strategic PMO. Some of the things that we can start focusing on as we prepare our organizations for a VUCA reality, and we've heard some of these things before when we talk about the concept of empowerment, but move from a hierarchy to self-organization. Push decisions down to the edge of the organization where information is the freshest and most salient. Move from protecting information to the democratization of information, to empower employees to make decisions and make communication frictionless. Speed up interactions. In the VUCA world, in the VUCA age, speed matters more than perfection. And have simple rules to make quick decisions. This leads us into what is the magic behind enterprise agility. Well, interestingly enough, what drives enterprise agility is the capacity of the organization to have learning agility. And what do we mean by that? Well, there are actually several factors. Self-awareness. This is the extent to which an individual knows his or her true strengths and weaknesses. Instead of trying to make yourself the ultimate in all areas, recognize where you need to have people who are strong in areas where you are not, from an organizational perspective. Mental agility. This is an ability to examine problems in unique and unusual ways. What worked in the past most likely will not be effective in the future. Therefore, trends won't work. And you have to look at problems in a completely new way, like the MRI machine. Who would have ever thought of making a pirate ship into an MRI machine, or vice versa? People agility. Skilled communicators who can work with diverse types of people. We have more diversity today than ever before because of our global world. We're connected to everyone. There's differences in age, culture, religion, time is different. Skill sets are different. So many diversities we've never had to even imagine to deal with, which makes the idea of communicating much more challenging and much more imperative. Then we look at change agility. We need to create a culture that actually welcomes experimentation, because it's only through our failures that we find out what succeeds. And results agility. We no longer have the flexibility to do it 3 or 4 times and then hope we get it right. We have to be able to deliver results the first time out. So what does an organization need to have in place in order to create this learning agility setting, which then creates enterprise agility? The first is a growth mindset. A key pitfall of many organizations seeking to be or become agile is the lack of awareness and maturity of dealing with change. Agility is the means to adapt and change our thinking and our actions. And because change is difficult for everyone, leadership is responsible for creating a culture of change, starting with themselves. Being open to multiple perspectives, seeking and using feedback, and self-awareness of their own thinking and the organizational impacts. Secondly, catalyst leaders. Most organizational leaders operate based on their expertise from when they were a contributor or based on their heroic ability to direct others to accomplish goals, trend analysis, and in the past. And while these operating mindsets can be effective early on, they limit the growth and maturity of the organization to address future challenges. Developing these leaders' growth mindset and catalyst behavior unleashes new potential and value within the organization. The other thing we want to look at is adapting from the agile organizational values. Thinking outside in treats agile approaches as a process to be implemented by the organization. If you think about the agile methodology, the truth is agile approaches come with built-in value systems as created in the 2001 Agile Manifesto. So if you introduce agile without regard to the value system, this often creates friction within the organization and leads to reduction in effectiveness and lack of sustainability. And fourth, customer value delivery focus. While customer focus and cross-functional teams are the heart and soul of an effective agility approach, when leaders focus first here, without regard to the first three, growth mindset, catalyst leaders, and an agile organizational values, there's limited effectiveness and sustainability ensue. Due to the high complexity and uncertainty and rapid pace of change, organizations learn most effectively through doing. I'd like to direct you then to the secret power of culture. Now, what's interesting, when you hear about mergers and acquisitions or reorganizations or repositioning or adding divisions within an organization, you hear about the people. We've changed out the management. We've changed out leadership. We've identified some new beliefs and values for our organization, or the structure. We have a new structure, new reporting system, new systems, new processes, policies, unwritten rules. But what's interesting about all of this is we never focus on changing the organizational culture. Does the organizational culture need to change to adapt to the future? Or do we adapt the future to the existing organizational culture? Well, can a caveman fly a plane? Not likely. So we need to look at organizational culture and make sure that whatever change we put in place actually resonates within the culture. And what do we mean by that? We are tribal beings. Culture is our collective identity. It is the stories we believe to be true about us in our world. Any kind of meaningful change needs to take culture into account. Mindset is a set of attitudes, a set of assumptions. It's closely related to culture. Maybe culture and mindset are just two perspectives of the very same thing. There was a recent Deloitte study that reported 87% of organizations cite culture and engagement as one of their top challenges. Yes, it's important for the organization, but it is essential for organizational survival, which one hopes is much more essential concern. Reinventing in Organizations is a new book by Frederick Laloux. He explains 3 breakthroughs of a new organization type: self-management, wholeness, and emergent purpose. Organizations without bosses, where nobody is supposed to tell anybody else what to do. New kinds of decision-making, people who are treated as adults. This leads to an uncommon and sometimes inconvenient kind of culture. In such an organization, we can't blame anyone but ourselves for our fate, and we need to take responsibility for our actions. So when we look at the attitudes and the cultural organization norms, we have to look at how we perceive things. For example, most organizations believe that we will lose money if we don't keep everyone busy. That's why they don't want to have a virtual office or have people working from home. Because if I can't see you working, you must not be doing anything, and you need to be punching that time card. By enforcing this cultural norm, we will lose the ability to be innovative and to create an innovative setting. Another example of cultural attitude and norms, let's consider the Agile methodology and an example that we can use from that. A very common complaint in Scrum adoption is that daily stand-ups are a waste of time. A common reason for that is that nobody dares to ask for help, so no one gets helped and the meeting is futile. Culture is a set of values and beliefs. Scrum values courage and openness based on the belief that asking for help leads to effective collaboration. But if the organization does not value this kind of courage, based on the belief that if you'll get hurt if you show vulnerability, asking for help is a sign of weakness in such a culture and therefore is not compatible with where you're going in terms of agility of the organization. The limit to culture is always the most senior manager involved in the change initiative. The leader's level of consciousness is the limit to how much culture can shift and their role in the organization. For real change, leaders must lead, and it starts with their behavior. This creates an upper bound on what is possible within the organization. And that drives to awareness, desire, and ability. There needs to be an awareness that the cultural model to create a language for talking about culture and to create awareness of where we are now and create that comfort level that evolving who we are doesn't take away from our praxis, doesn't take away from the essence of who we are. A desire. There are a number of case studies you can use to help people understand what is possible, the office of the future. How would we evolve to that, and do we want to? And the ability. The techniques such as reverse seniority reporting, leading through context, delegation poker, etc. All these different techniques and abilities that we can put in place to create that future norm and create a change-ready organization that retains its praxis and is able to be sustainable as we move forward into a VUCA world. So this leads to the traditional PMO limitations. To be more effective, PMOs must evolve their capabilities and services in a way that translates into value. And we've heard that word a lot for their customers and programs. Historically, PMOs have focused on overseeing the tactical activities of a program or a portfolio, which means more reporting, more paperwork, and more meetings. These programs often track what has been called the iron triangle of schedule, scope, and costs. And how these activities translate into the enhanced value is left more to faith than fact. Many traditional PMOs fall short of their potential by ignoring whether or not programs are strategically aligned to organizational strategy, with only focusing on tactical items like outputs and not on the overall program outcomes, using program data for status instead of strategic performance management, being overly process-driven for the sake of process only, and failing to implement program mechanisms that focus on the soft skills needed for organizational change management, communications, training, innovation, and stakeholder feedback loops. The result? Program stakeholders and staff view PMOs as an unwelcome drain on budgets rather than a source of guidance and resources. In other words, cost centers rather than value centers. Traditional PMOs seem to disproportionately highlight aspects of programs that are not going well, like falling behind schedule and going over budget, or failing to comply with program guidelines. The takeaway is clear. PMOs that only manage scope, schedule, cost, and risk must evolve into something that offers greater value. So how can PMOs recast their less than optimal reputation? For starters, these teams can and should completely rethink their role, tone, and function. In a VUCA era, trend analysis has very little value, right? What we need to do is have, in the third wave of the digital age and our fourth industrial revolution, we need to understand the impact of policy and partnerships and the appropriate decisions as we look at strategic and operational challenges that emerge. And this is an area in which the PMO can actually drive sustainability for the organization. How program team members engage with stakeholders must change also. Old school PMOs have been around and been about compliance and control and checking up on managers to make sure everything is as it should be. A value-based PMO adopts a service-oriented approach, an approach that helps program managers drive the program forward toward desired mission outcomes. The value-centered PMO is there to support program managers, not criticize them and call them out for their failures. So what are some things that distinguish a value-driven next-generation PMO? Engage stakeholders and integrate strategies to unlock innovative potential. PMOs serve as a facilitator and a governor for change. By surfacing ideas, technology, functions, and capabilities that offer strategic synergies, program managers can help to shape strategies to manage risk and digital transformation. Collecting and using data to drive strategic and operational insights, and being better prepared to shape strategy, inform decision-making, and track performance. And when we look at tracking performance, explore the customer perspectives on performance, business performance against plans, and how trade-offs impact capability performance. Producing information that builds consensus and takes the guesswork out of decision-making. We've talked about this in team norms and storms, knowing how you're going to deal with issues and concerns before you have an issue and concern, so that you take that personality challenge out of it. Helping to prepare the organization for change. Organizational change management seeks to build awareness of a change, knowledge of how workers will be impacted, and a desire to accept the change and knowledge of how to adopt and succeed. The next generation PMO assists with stakeholder engagement, communications, and educational efforts that prepare a workforce for change. And naturally, we want to do the basics better in the next generation PMO and streamline, do what's effective, not what just makes the tick mark. And finally, managing innovation and continuous learning through the PMO. To get true value from innovation efforts, organizations need processes and controls to guide prototype, learn from the good and the bad, and advance qualifying efforts to projects that scale. As integrators, process stewards, and information analysts, PMO personnel are uniquely suited to performing innovation management and sharing the lessons learned from innovation efforts. And that is because of their leadership agility.
That would be the clue for me to step back in after that download of information. Thank you, Dr. CJ. I must say how beautiful you are today, how wonderful you speak. I must say that because she's my wife. I am her husband. That being said, let's now talk about leadership agility and the concept of leadership. And as a segue into that, with all the information that we've shared with you so far, there are a couple things I think that we want to point out. First of all, in this industry, in the project management world in particular, you can get a lot of training, you can go to a lot of conferences, and you get all sorts of excellent advice and information, tools and techniques that stem from the experience of people who've been around and been successful for a long, long time. The problem, of course, is absorbing that information and then implementing it. And there is no expectation. Sometimes I think when we're hearing this, if we're diligent in taking notes, how am I going to do this? What do I do? Remembering that you take away from almost any presentation, at least this has been my experience, and I've seen the stats that show the surveys prove this to be true. We take away anywhere from 10 to 12% of the information that's shared with us in training. More likely, about 15 to 18% of our experiences lead change for us. So now we're up to about 30% driving change in how we go about making a difference. If we're introduced to the new idea of leadership agility, and we've been given all kinds of models and pictures and suggestions and ideas like we're going to see in a minute in leadership agility, just a suggestion is jot down 3 or 4 things that really resonate with you from this webinar, and then implement those. And that's a good start and a good basic. And then go back and take a few more pieces and implement those. And that's how a PMO then becomes change ready. That's how a PMO can become agile. And that's how you can become a much better and a much more agile leader. So I just wanted to lead into the idea of leadership agility, Prax-ical Magic. What is that? Well, leadership agility comes from the ability of a leader to engender, create, promote, encourage in those around them. Ta-da! Next slide. What we call magical thinking. Now, why do we use the term magic? That sounds so unprofessional. Typically, we think of magic in the sense of the noun. It's actual something that transforms or changes things and doesn't really have a logical explanation. It just happens. The adjective is having essentially the ability to charm, enchant, entrance, fascinate, something supernatural. That's not what we're talking about. Next slide. Magical thinking in leadership is, and this is really interesting, at least I think so. 3 major surveys by 3 of the largest business schools in the country, Columbia and Harvard and UCLA. And they asked essentially the same questions in their leadership surveys. And one of the questions really stands out from those surveys because it was the same question. What is the quality in leaders that you have seen who are successful? Leaders that you would follow, almost without question. What is the one quality that stands out? Now, of course, many qualities were listed, so they looked at their answers and they went in terms of percentile. And among these 3 surveys, 83% of respondents, when combined, said the leader is charismatic. What they didn't mean was charismatic in terms of personality and being able to act and being a Ronald Reagan or a Bill Clinton or a Barack Obama in terms of their ability to deliver a speech. What they meant by charismatic is the leader's ability to engender trust. And we'll move ahead in that slide right here. Trust to the extent that they believe the leader has your back in all situations at all times. They care about me. And that creates a trust. I'll follow you if I know you care about me. I know you're reliable. I know your word is golden. And so magical thinking in terms of agile leadership is to be charismatic in the terms of showing the people that you lead that they matter to you. Charisma, that's a Greek term. Essentially, it means gifted. And actually, that is a gift. It's not so much a skill, it's a gift. Next slide. What that translates into is being human fluent, understanding people. Now, it's more difficult to do that today because we're not in, next slide, we're not in a warm body situation so much. And again, by 2030, 80%, they estimate, if even that's close, of business and commerce and all transactions are in a digital platform. How can you engage with individuals? How can you do the things you do today when you're sitting across from someone, touching perhaps, looking in their eyes, getting that energy that flows, as they call the Correlian effect, where you can actually sense a person's mood. Maybe you get connection. Some people call it chemistry. That doesn't happen in digital platforms. But you still have the major challenge of thought transfer. In third wave of the digital age, thought transfer happens digitally, electronically, using electrons. I have an idea. I have a vision. I have a thought. It can be about one particular aspect of how my project is going. It might be about a strategy, a change. It might be about your behavior on it could be anything. And I want that idea to transfer to you so that you understand it, so that you will act upon it, and so that you can transfer that thought to someone else. Now, we're constantly doing that in all of our endeavors, but in a digital format, you have to do that electronically. So you don't have the ability to get the feel that comes from someone talking to you face to face. Nor do you have the ability to understand another person to the degree to which you can face-to-face. Warm body situations, some people, I wish we were some of them, but we aren't, but we're learning, can size up another individual within a matter of 2 to 3 minutes. And by that, I mean, can pretty much tell you how you think, how artistic you are, how thought-oriented you are, left or right-brained, what your preferences are, whether you enjoy conflict or confrontation or not, fight or flight, and a whole series of things. It's amazing. We've had it done to us from experts in this field within 3 minutes of conversation, and they were about 95% correct. You can't do that digitally. So what you have to do through electronic communication is be able to read emails, texts. Maybe you can do this sort of a visual online connection. You saw in the video earlier, the robotics is one way that cameras are everywhere, but it still doesn't do what warm body connection does. Next slide. So that's what magical thinking is. It's human fluent. It's not process fluent. What do we mean by that? SMEs will always be critical, always be important. Technology even more so, because that's what's driving these changes. But being technologically fluent, that is to say being a programmer or being an engineer or everything, is going to be critical, but it isn't going to be the critical aspect of management and leadership in the future. If you're involved in using an agile methodology in your projects right now, you understand a little bit more how important human fluency is, and not just technology and having the applications of SMEs. And certainly not strategy and goal-driven as it used to be in the 20th century when we had the old hierarchical management style. Next slide. Last thing that we want to cover here is to remember a project, more than anything else, is people. What we've been talking about here is learning how to deal more effectively with people. Magic, maybe. Human fluency, absolutely. Whatever you are doing within the structure of a PMO, dealing with your organization, your managers, your team, your stakeholders, your users, your clients, what's behind the bubbles on your screen are human beings. They can be any place in their life. They can be professional or be struggling with their professionalism on the job. There could be divorces. There could be deaths. There could be health issues. There could be interpersonal relationships and conflicts going on. Certainly, more than anything else, there are differing expectations, differing assumptions, different life experiences, different education, different abilities to communicate. All of this, that complexity that Dr. CJ was talking about, that ambiguity that comes out in dealing with human beings, is yours because you are responsible as a leader operating within a PMO environment. So this is one of those 3 or 4 takeaways we hope you'll have today. Whatever you do, wherever, whenever, if you don't develop your people skills, your human fluency, become more understanding, aware, empathetic, certainly putting people ahead of all other things in your thinking, and then of course that translates to actions, then in a fast-paced digital environment, third wave, sustainability is going to become very problematic. Next slide. Inspiring quotes. This is really important in webinars. If you don't have inspiring quotes, somehow you're not doing your job. And so we have one from Seth Godin. I want to just conclude real quickly with a story to illustrate this point. And I know quickly because we're running out of time here. We had a client who was having some problems. The client thought, the CEO thought the problem was essentially within the PMO on a major project, a major initiative that was going to have significant change within their organization. It was a mid-sized corporation. They had about 250 employees. And so they invited us in and said, do you think you can do something for us? We said, well, we'll give it a shot. We'll come in, we'll take a day, we'll look at your organization if you can show us around, and then we'll get back to you and we'll see exactly what we might or might not be able to do. So we did. We came in, we met with the CEO, we sat in the office, he gave us a great talk about what their mission was, what their strategies were, what the project was. He showed us a great flow chart that showed how things had progressed. Then we went out into the office. We saw the area where the admin staff resided. They had an incredible state-of-the-art conference room that even allowed for video conferencing. We went out in the staff area and looked at the different workstations. Up to date, they had the best equipment. They had the nice, neatest little calculators and printers you can imagine. I'd never seen these things before. We went into the computer room. They had their own unique server. They had a team that was dedicated, we understood, to that server. And by the time we had done about 2 hours of touring around, shaking hands and walking back, we sat down. And he said, "So what do you think?" I said, "That was fascinating. Thanks for doing that. Now, will you show me your company?" "What are you talking about?" He said, "I just did that." "No, actually, you didn't. You showed me how your company functions. We wanted to see the people. We wanted to look them in the eye. We wanted to talk to them a little bit, and we will do that if you want us to engage. But we wanted to understand how your organization is peopled." And after we went out and spent just a few minutes with the manager of the PMO and some of their staff, and then talked to some other key personnel, we got a better idea of what was going on. There was a complete lack from top to bottom of putting the people in the organization first, which had created the assumption that management didn't care. It was just goal-oriented, and they didn't matter. And so they didn't perform up to the standards that they normally could have had they been more motivated, had they trusted management, had they believed their management had their backs. And that was the kind of training that we brought for only 5 days. I'd like to say that the organization went on and did a stellar job. It didn't. It was incremental. But over the next 6 months, morale improved, performance improved, and they were able to actually implement their project successfully, and were actually able to implement the change that was needed. So that's an example of how important human fluency is in this day and age, and more important as the years are going to go by. Next slide.
Thank you. So as we wrap this up, the magical solution for a PMO-led transformational project leadership model. And what do we mean by that? Well, think about it. Anybody can create change. Change is just the thing, the event. If I turn off the lights, that's change. But how you learn to function in the dark is transformation. And that's what we're trying to emphasize here with transformational project leadership. We are helping guide the people, the organization, to a new future. Strategic foresight, where we've decided as a collective that we want to go and be. You will only have sustainable change if, in fact, people desire it and have the capability to change. You can't force them. And because we work at will, right? So if they don't like what's happening, they can just leave. So how is this TPL model different? You notice with innovation, connection, and integrity, we're not emphasizing or focusing on a schedule, cost, or budget, or scope. We're focusing on the nuances of it, right? TPL is a holistic approach to integrating strategy, project delivery, and organizational transformation. It utilizes portfolios, programs, and projects to implement strategy and ensure sustainability. So often people are able to create strategy, but they can't implement it so that it's sustainable. How does TPL differ from traditional strategy, project, or change management? The 21st century business world demands an end-to-end solution in order to achieve sustainability. Projects can no longer afford to live in silos, or strategy passes the baton to delivery, which passes the baton to change. It demands instead one group of experts from end to end. where delivery and change work together as a team in all three phases of the project, lending their knowledge, experience, networks, and advice to each other every step of the way. Leadership shifts or may shift as the project moves out of delivery into change, but the team is intact and functioning until change is accomplished. In the Napoleonic era, Napoleon recognized that modern armies needed to adopt to modern arms and manpower potential of new nation states by abolishing the old ways of waging war. Instead of three competing services, artillery, infantry, cavalry, which so often got in the way of each other, performing duplicative functions and even adversely affecting the outcome on the battlefield, he created an armée du corps, where large groups of artillery, infantry, and cavalry combined to form an independent corps which operated in a combined manner. At times, the artillery arm took the forefront in a battle, to be followed by an infantry assault on key enemy positions, exploited by a cavalry attack to rout the foe and finish the job. There is power in three. There always has been. Two legs cannot make a stool or a table, but three can. Two partners can come to loggerheads, but three creates the need for consensus. And there is power in a combined approach to leadership when it is involved in strategy, delivery, and change. And in fact, our 21st century world demands this. Now, as a rather amusing and poignant way of finalizing our say, we will go on mute while you hear breaking news, and then we'll be back for Q&A.
We have breaking news. A CEO goes on trial this week for using obsolete and ineffective leadership principles, which allegedly led to the loss of $31 million in potential company profits. Our legal reporter, Charles Gray, has been covering this groundbreaking proceeding. Charles?
That's right, John. In a shocking action sending waves across the nation, longtime CEO Lee Dership is being sued by two of his executives who alleged that his leadership skills were ineffective and out of date, and cost his company as much as $31 million.
His style no longer works in the 21st century. This is the digital age. It demands a new approach. And he not only knew it, but he refused to adapt.
What approach should Lee Dership have used?
TPL, Transformational Project Leadership. We all went to a conference and learned how to use it and what it would do for us. TPL would have saved us millions. Dership has no excuse.
It's a case of old leadership versus new. The methods, not the man. And today, the embattled CEO spoke out for the first time.
Yes, we learned about TPL, but the old-fashioned principles have worked for centuries. They've made this company tens of millions of dollars. So why would I chart a different course? We'll show that personality-driven leadership, my leadership, still makes for sound sailing for leaders who sail their ships in the waters where leadership sails today.
Legal precedents aside, this looks to be a groundbreaking case, pitting centralized corporate leadership against an increasingly globalized online world where traditional methods can oppose innovative approaches. Whichever prevails may tell us what the future will look like. John?
Thanks, Charles. For more on this, we're joined by noted leadership expert and author, Dr. C.J. Walker-Waite. Thanks for coming in. What do you make of all this?
Thanks, John. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm not certain how this will play out in court. That's up to the jury. But I am familiar with Transformational Project Leadership, or TPL, as developed by the Praxis Corporation. And from what I can see, Bungler has a good case.
But isn't it hard to prove negligence and misfeasance, which is what the plaintiffs allege?
Yes, but as you heard, the defendant learned about TPL and saw that in order to survive and be sustainable in today's global digital marketplace, old leadership concepts just don't work anymore.
So how does that affect business and government leadership?
Traditional, centralized, authoritarian leadership is ineffective. Soft skills, like empowering people, Maximizing technological potential and using human analytics are the new marketplace drivers, and the TPL course provided the exact training. I imagine leadership wishes he had listened to Praxis more closely right about now.
Well, we'll keep an eye on this as the case proceeds. In the meantime, to prevent your next leadership disaster, you can learn more about transformational project leadership at praxistransforms.com.
So thanks very much.
Appreciate you taking the time. I look forward to seeing you in the future.
Alan and Dr. C.J. Walker-Waite, that was amazing. Thank you so much for being a part of the summit.
Absolutely. It's our pleasure.
Absolutely.
And of course, with all of these amazing insights, naturally there are going to be some questions. So I have a couple of them that I'd like to ask you on behalf of everyone who's watching and listening to us. So I know that when we talked about enterprise agility, we talked about the concept of EPMOs in general. My question to you is, we have a lot of folks here who are either in smaller organizations or mid-sized organizations, and EPMOs probably don't exist there. And the scope and scale of their PMOs is much smaller than the EPMOs. So why should they care about enterprise agility?
Absolutely. Any organization that you're in, small, medium, or large, in order to be competitive and in order to be sustainable in the future, you have to have enterprise agility. You have to be able to adapt to the marketplace, adapt to the changing technology and changing demands. And one of the things that we find in organizational transformation is that change is not just defined from a top. That's strategic initiative management, right? That's just defining the strategic direction that you want to go. But in order for it to be implemented, you need to have what they call change agents. And these are either super users or empowered individuals or leaders in the organization that might not even have the title leader, or the PMO leading by example, which will help the organization move from their current state to their future state. And therefore, this concept of enterprise agility is not exclusively for an EPMO. I know there are large organizations such as IBM who have both a project management office and a change management office. And so I would see those two as actually coming together in a collaborative effort to lead the organization forward. But with the smaller ones, who else are they going to turn to? I mean, you are the individual, you are the team, you are the PMO that wears multiple hats. And you have that capability to drive enterprise agility and to make your organization sustainable and competitive in the future.
Amazing. Thanks so much for that, Dr. C.J. Walker. Now, my next question and final question for our session today is, you talked a lot about leadership agility, and we talked a lot about soft skills. One soft skill that is being talked a lot about today is emotional intelligence. So how does emotional intelligence tie into leadership agility?
Yeah, I'll take that. That's an excellent question. I think that we've touched on that in the presentation to some degree, but let me amplify that a little bit because it is a very important question. The idea of emotional intelligence is something that's, I think, about 7 or 8 years old in the industry. And it's leading towards the notion of human fluency as we've developed it. Being aware, understanding, being a lot smarter about human beings and how they behave, how they act, how they're suited or what they're suited for. In EI, you're going to have the capability to take a look at people and take a look at your organization and say, this is somebody who is really more suited for an analytical slot than they are a technical slot. So there's those kinds of things happening. What we're saying in the PMO is that leaders today, and particularly in PMO settings, are going to have to be, as you would say in EI, more artful, more understanding of the human equation. That's because human analytics is being applied more and more in a digital framework to substitute for warm body interaction. So you're going to have to learn to dance. That's a term that we've coined here. The art of being a project leader is like learning how to dance. When I started as a first time I went to do ballroom dancing was when CJ and I were about to get married, and I had spent my entire life professionally avoiding it. I couldn't put one foot in front of the other. But finally, when the day came to go to the first dance lesson, after a few stiff ones, I went and walked in and realized it was just basically putting one foot in front of the other, learning how your partner dances. Dancing, in other words, became more learning your partner and what their next step was going to be, and then anticipating that. And once I figured that out, I was able to lead, because that was my job as a leader. So that's a long way, I think, of answering your question. Did that answer it?
It certainly did. It absolutely did. Thank you so much for that, Alan. Alan, CJ, thank you once again for being a part of the summit. It was great having you both.
Absolutely.
Our pleasure. Thank you.
And for everyone listening and watching us, you can find Alan and CJ at www.praxistransforms.com. All the information that you need to get in touch with them is right there on the screen. And I do need to let you know that Alan and CJ have just recently released a book. And can you guess the name? Indeed. It is Dance of the Project Leader. You can find that on Amazon.com. Go check it out. You'll be in for a treat. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.